are going to have right now the last activity of today in the spring seminar. I have the pleasure to be here alongside with Sofia Borges, who I'm going to present now. Sofia Borges is an artist who has been using photography to think about images and through images for the past 15 years. Since the early years of her career, she has been dealing with Montagem. Although her body of work has been identified with the language of photography, in the last 5 years she began to produce installations, performances, and curatorial practices, taking the idea of montage yet to another level in her artistic thinking. For instance, in 2016, she published The Swamp, an award-winning book artwork. In 2018, she co-curated the São Paulo Biennial, proposing a way to think tragically about the core of language through images. In 2020, she photographed Degas' pieces at MASP, making images, above images, on images, a trademark of her work, as the assemblages make clear. And Cecilia just talked about it, the section before this one. In 2021, she directed her first film, The Fossil, the Eye, and the Fire, which maybe I think we'll see a fragment here in a few minutes. Sofia dedicated herself to the research of prehistorical caves, art museums, paleontological and archaeological centers, alchemy, mythology, theater. The aim is to think about the relationship between culture, meaning, and its modes of representation. So, without further ado, I will pass the word to Sofia Borges, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be at the Spring Seminar of the Escola das Artes do Porto.
Thank you, Pedro. And I would like also to thank Camilo for maybe seeing things in my trajectory with more accuracy than myself, and for inviting me to this, and like that allowing me to draw a line that now became much more clear about the fact that I'm actually doing assemblages and since day one, or building everything under this concept of a complex understanding of image and of seeing, most of all. I would like to ask the technical team to allow my computer to appear. So out of the talk of David yesterday and of Delphine today, I did some changes, and that's how everything became more clear and complex. I don't know if Delphine is not here, because I will start presenting a part of my film, which was made entirely inside my studio. And Delphine was saying about the table as the map. And indeed, I have a 6 meters table in my studio. I used to have when my studio was in São Paulo, that it is a mental map of my work. And the studio itself is this mental map. So I did this film not as a work of art. I did this film as getting the camera and putting inside my head. It's not to be a work, it's to be a mental flux of thoughts and my own relation, the relation of the artist and of the work itself. And before showing the film, I think there are a few things that I want to say so you can grasp, especially in the very beginning. The first 20 minutes of this film is a mental flux of thoughts. And it's good if you know when I talk about mud and when I talk about swamp, what am I talking about? You will be able to get more from the film. So the metaphysics of seeing, I just changed it. It was the metaphysics of images. But actually what always had interested me was this phenomena, which is to see. and how matter is related to that. What is the relation between seeing, images, and matter? And the images I'm always thinking of when I say images are not images, photographic images, but the images within the eye. And how photography or film, they relate so closely to that it gives us a sense of experience when we see a photography. We have the experience of reality, which, because it's so similar, a photography, with the images we have in the back of the art, much more cinema. So I spent years photographing, and I couldn't care less for photography. Really, I don't care for photography. I'm not a photography fan. I don't see much of other photographies. But there was something about photography that it was being so useful for me to investigate this problem of things existing and the connection of this with meaning and the connection of this with matter. And most of all, the connection of those with depiction and representation. So this is the core of my work. I want to talk about montage, using mud, excavation, and most of all, reversed archaeology as the symbolic attempt in my research of achieving the inner images within an image. In the first 7 years of my practice, I was observing the thickness of images. But in the second 7 years, I started assembling or overposing them. As mud superposing mud, as meaning overlapping meaning, again and again and again. Creating second-degree images mostly with the use of assemblage, but then collage, but also curtains, fire, and pigment. With the use of performance, third or fourth or fifth-degree ones would appear. So just to explain this delirium, how do we say that? Delirium inside my head. I have I have a little text that I had written the delirium, so I will first read the text. But please understand that when I say swamp, is everything, all the objects were inside this swamp. But I was trying to remove the objects from this swamp. And the only thing I could see was not the object itself. It was the mud covering them. This is what I'm saying that images are. Images are this transparent mud over things. Reality as mud, as dance, as air. So this idea of metaphysics of seeing, and I would just jump back to the first to here. I put this, you will understand better after why I put the impossible of Maria Martins here, but I put it in this first page to say that what I'm interested in seeing, it's not the relation, and let's say this is the viewer, and this is the object, or this is comprehension, and this is expression. What I'm always have investigated is this mist, this problem, this incognito, the absent, the image within the experience of seeing, this phenomena which is to understand, to relate seeing with things. Pursuing something, I could see layer. This is the text, part of the text that it's in the back of my first and only book done so far, a big montage, call it The Swamp. Pursuing something, I could see layering over images. I spent years wandering around this swamp, the swamp of comprehension, of representation, of abstraction. I was looking at things, searching for their evidences. I kept trying to understand them physically, existing, but they were all covered with this dark, wet, melted substance, this unsolvable form, images presenting nothing but themselves. I spent the first 7 years of my research instinctively entering museums, zoos, study centers. I kept trying to understand resemblance, mimesis, symbol, depiction. I knew they were covering all the objects I was looking at, and I intentionally wanted to learn how to distinguish the difference between mimesis, meaning, image, and matter. Paradoxically, I was seeking to do that by the use of photography. After so much time looking at things and trying to understand the images of things, one day, when entering prehistorical caves, I finally realized the problem of image actually lies in the problem of reality. We cannot signify reality, and we have been trying forever. Sculptures, drawings, maps, photographs, schemes, objects, writings, traces, fossils, animal representing animals, rocks, fake rocks, portraits of people, people posing for portraits. Countless things explaining, depicting, translating, resembling other things. So many distinct objects, all surfaces equally thick, all equally empty and embedded with the same myriad of meaning. I'm talking about images. After years staring at endless things and after entering those caves without ever being able to fully understand any of it, I realized that the very act of seeing is empty and abstract. Image forming in the back of the eye is language. To see is not evident. It is only from a linguistic experience of translation, from abstract vision to representative comprehension, that arises the images as crystallines, transparent, layers of meaning, emerging like water from the deep of this black, muddy abstract, the abstract of comprehension. So this is important also to affirm something. I'm interested in abstraction in photography, but it's not abstraction in the terms of form, it's abstraction in the terms of comprehension. It doesn't matter if it's an image that it's a splash of ink or if the image of a rabbit. What matters to me is when I reach a point where I can present the impossibility of this being fully presentable. Images do not exist. With that, I will now show kind of the 5 first minutes of the film. The film has 44 minutes, and if this matter is something that makes sense for any of you, please write me asking for the full link, the link for the full film, because it's really, really, it was, if The Swamp was my first attempt to give all in, this film was the second attempt of really trying, not of doing a work, but of showing these thoughts about everything that we're going to see here. And this is the cover of the book. That's why I said that poem, images do not exist. The name of the film is The Fossil, the Eye, and the Fire. thousands of words, and above them, an unspoken intention. This intention is the same as when I'm holding a photographic camera or the charcoal pencil that I use to write, draw, and new poems. Or the clay to make some ball-shaped objects. Sometimes full, sometimes empty. To understand whatever it is that they contain. I call them, these mud balls, enigmas. After molding them with my hands, they get covered with a metallic dust, which makes them feel like a shining, solid, existing thing. Enigmas, just like everything that exists. Either a specific form of space, of sound, of feeling, of matter, of time, of thought. I have a sense that I would need 4 hours of film to properly explain those mud balls, so I'm just showing them here, unpretentiously, with the desire that it's possible to capture a glimpse of this that for more than a decade I'm trying to understand too. All these charcoal images, objects, and mud, all are gestures that spring from this sort of metaphysical conception that involves everything that exists for me. I have been thinking about this for many years, about this mist that fills all the empty thickness that hovers between image, content, mimesis, and representation. After years, I understood that it is a desire to make contact with the real and not with the representation itself. The pure, real. For Jung, I think it arises from the fullness between unconscious and consciousness. The alchemical gold, the empty diamond of Buddha, the endless space outside Plato's cave. In short, there are so many names for this place. I'm always so surprised that there are thousands of names. I mean, for any one thing, there are an infinite numbers of names multiplied times every time that someone pronounces it. All as infinite, as incredibly imprecise, tragic, mistaken. This is the tragic beauty of representation. I think that language is a daughter of this, a torrential river gushing forth from this spring, running wildly to cover everything, really everything. As soon as it exists, it is covered. Artists, I think, are the people that are fascinated by this water, as also are the philosophers, the scientists, the shamans. Everything's covered and everything exists from this. When we say a word, we only leave this water on the top of the thing, and the taste that it has is what is understood. Every meaning was a transparent layer of an invisible type of matter, something that covers the object and isolates it from any direct confrontation. Film, very good. This metaphysical crystalline melted nothingness that, when intentionally removed from the object, would give rise to a pure, designified experience. In other words, the removal of folds of meaning that cover the object would provide a revealed and translucent experience. So within this metaphor, meaning would be an opaque film while the experience would be empty and therefore clear and firm, like the diamond. I remember waking up as a child and being completely detached to the coherence of the thing represented to be a thing. Waking up in this state happened endlessly. I remember having no connection, not even with the sound of my name when pronounced as a test inside my head. I remember opening my eyes in my room while late and everything being detached.
In this sense, the emptiness of things remains for me as palpable as a mountain. Over the years, the fascination or dizziness that this experience caused me ended up celebrating me an ambiguous desire. Sometimes sought to withdraw the pellicule of me to see the objects in their plenitude, and sometimes superimpose them with layers of comprehension. Like language does, blinding them with as many meanings I could give, and, therefore, see, and possibly, it is precisely this ambiguous desire to which I react by being an artist. Since that time in childhood, I imagined I would be a writer. When I decided to study art, it was by the accident of entering an exhibition and finding everything incredibly heavy, absurdly heavy, and got hypnotized by the possibility of doing something absurd. When I entered art school, I quickly understood that I didn't need to know how to do things. It was actually the opposite. So by not knowing how, I started to draw.
I wish I could show everything. But maybe we can get the light back. You want to see a bit more?
For months, every night, capturing something completely abstract in very symbolic images. Really every night. It was a blind jump inside something that it was just falling out from my hands. During the days in art school, I was interested in sculptures. To be formed was enrapturing. But paradoxically, almost as a curse or destiny, the one practice where I would reach that absurd with stunning precision ended up being images. I mean those that keeps emerging in the back of the eye. I was doing drawings, sculptures in art school, and within this context, one day I did a photograph of my family talking in the kitchen. But the photograph appeared so detached to what I was experiencing, as if showing a layer beyond. It was at this moment that I got absorbed by trying to grasp what the images. 15 years passed, and I am still. After that day, I started to do self-portraits to investigate.
I promise to send the link. So, this, even for me, it's a bit difficult to leave the mental space of my own head, which I so easily go back to when I see this film. But what I tried here in this presentation, what I will try to do, is to show how from the very beginning until now, I'm more or less doing the same thing, but with inner, with that mud, having, with the ability of making that mud be again and again and again appearing over images. So I have a poem, of course, from a poem that you will recognize, but I have a poem that images are images, are images, are images. And this idea of reversed archaeology is trying to reach something of an image by going deeper, by excavating and finding more degrees of images within. So it's not as a thing that goes up, it's a thing that gets deeper in the sense of what a thing is. These are my first images that after doing self-portraits, I started to photograph things. And I was portraiting them as I was in the self-portraits. And the first thing I managed to captivate this exquisite something that I would see in the portrait. I'm jumping a few moments here, important, but was actually the portrait that I did of a camel. Everything that you're going to see, I did inside museums or study centers or zoos or aquariums, because in these first 7 years, there was something there that was so interesting. I'm just recording. And I couldn't really know why I was only being able to photograph a vase inside a museum other than a vase in my house, but then, or a camel inside, a dog, an owl inside a zoo, other than an owl in the nature. And then one day I realized that it was because the animal in the zoo, it's not only the animal, but it represents. So a camel in a zoo, it's not only a camel, but it's the representation of all the camels. A vase in a museum, it's not only a vase, it represents a period, geography, represents the meaning today of that vase, represents an entire culture within that vase, represents the fact that a person did that vase with that specific technique. It has so many layers of meaning over a vase in the museum that I could more easily photograph those layers, or even photograph the object without any layer. That is what I describe when I say that I had this, and I really had. When I was a child, I would wake up sometimes, many times, with the feeling of detachment. So I couldn't find relations between me and the place I was, which was my house or my sister. So that helped me to perceive things with and without absolute meaning. So this is a very interesting image. It's called the monster. This one is called sound, as a reference to matter. And this is called the monster. And I did it in a museum of paleontology or something like that in Brussels. And it's actually a fossil. But it's as if it's a thing without the covering image of that thing. As same as this, which is the head of the horse, which I did in a museum in Paris, of anatomy and compared anatomy. And then again, the monster, because I find fascinating how both of these images are kind of stripped out of the image of a horse and the image of something that would have to be layering over that object, and that object is kind of naked or raw. And even in this, it is also a raw. We can see the muscles of the horse. It's not a horse itself. So as if these two works together, they kind of, it's this excavation. What is what if we remove the image, what is this monstrosity of seeing without comprehending what it is to see? These are just some examples. This I did in the replica of Chauvet prehistorical cave, the most ancient prehistorical cave ever found. That was a very important moment in my trajectory. When I was 2 days before the opening of Chauvet to the public, I was allowed to photograph it. So I was photographing the mimesis of the most ancient prehistorical caves ever found. I will jump. I will not show in the entirely the swamp, because but it is a philosophical statement, the swamp, and it was recognized immediately when it got out. It was a book that won the British award and was sold out in 3 months. And I got many reviews, spontaneous reviews from specialized magazines and people. I will read one. Reality as mud, as dense as air, reads the spine of Sofia Borges' book, The Swamp. And equally, the series of photographs that she presents is as leading as impenetrable. Spanning a 7-year period, it largely records Borges' countless visits to natural history museums, zoos, aquariums, and research centers, where the artifice of reality become her point of focus. For Borges, displays such as habitat dioramas serve as the ultimate form of representation, where objects have the virtuous task to representing themselves, a type, genre, or group that it is inherently bound to language through layers of history and meaning. As a motionless walrus lies in its plastic Antarctic locale, he is describing a picture of mine that it's a walrus in a diorama, or the beady eye of a fossilized bird, also a owl in a zoo, catches your glance. What glares back at you from the depths of the swamp, it's not the thing in itself, but the image of an image of an image. Quoting, "What I seek are images which, in their very artifice, are able to present themselves as a problem," Borges has said. Beyond the comical absurdity of museological spectacles that span the living dead, the swamp takes aim at the notion that images can be read. Taking inspiration from the insoluble language of Beckett on the one hand, and the cinematic mind twists of Lynch on the other, Borges disrupts logical processes of comprehension, offering seemingly random sequences of images whose monstrous forms and coarse surfaces purposefully assault the senses. When I manage to create an image that removes from that image the possibility of meaning something, then I could reach the heart of my questioning, to designify reality and dissolve this boundary. My interest in the photographic comes from the metaphysical order. Through photography, I investigate abstraction, but not from the point of view of the form, but from the point of view of the significance and comprehension. From the possibility of to comprehend what is something, in which you dissolve the comprehension of that one thing. Because when you dissolve the comprehension of what is the other, you can cross it and you become that, for there is no more boundaries. So just to go back here, what I really was interested in the object, it was its existence and incognito of what is finally to exist. And my attempt is when I present something that so strongly holds this problem, I also can uphold the very problem of existing and being this strange situation. Everything is a bit invisible. This is just something that I found when I was doing this, that it's from the time that I was launching The Swamp. And here is a poem that goes on the back of The Swamp that I wanted to read. I will translate. Matter is a myriad. Reality, I don't know what it is. Everything occurs by its own resistance. Meaning is contained in everything, and from it can never evade. Unless by this empty, absent, vacuous, and firm, which is to exist. Therefore, everything exists by its own negativity. And the firm white is so firm that not even light contains. And a sort of abominable wondrousness. I'm in doubt if I show the book. What do you think, Camilo? If I read the poem? I will read the poem within the book. So I will go very fast, because there is a poem that crosses the entire book, and I will read it to you. You will only get the feeling of the book, okay? So in the page, there's no name. In the first page, in the cover of the book, there is a poem called "Images Do Not Exist." Solid white, solid white. Solid sound. Absent light as existence. And all things being. Unequivocally thick. Image is a substance of meaning. Forcibly, inevitably, absolutely, and without exception. Objects are a distinguishable nothing. And difference is an unconceivable. From which oozes, drops, melts. What is called time. But spaces also are thick. And that is so strange. And that's the fact of all visible things. And from all this and from all that, melts. That's it. So what I chose for this is to get back to a moment that I was actually showing in Portugal, in Lisbon, in Berardo Museum, to say about the second layer of montage in my work, which is very, very fundamental and important, which is the exhibition. This, I will present two, I will focus on two of those exhibitions from these early works, that is 2013. Exhibitions as practices of unsolvability or of incognito. And I will read a text that it's as old as this shows. This is 10 years ago. For instance, I find it fascinating that some mathematical problems exist. They can be written as a sentence, but have no solution. There are indeed some mathematical equations where a complex sentence, a sequence of precise and defined happenings, results unmistakably to be equal to 0 or to infinity or to have no solution at all. I find it really fascinating that there is an equation And there's not a solution for that equation, but the equation exists. And we'll have the solution one day, or will not, but it exists. So this helped me so much how to build exhibitions, because I was trying to create a zero or an infinity of results through the combination of a group of very specific chosen images. What is the difference between zero and infinity? Mathematical language is just another attempt to understand or translate or depict reality. And because it's very simple in logic, mathematical language is of great help when I try to think about the problem of other languages, the one related to images, words, sounds, and acts. Remember that I consider seeing a linguistic phenomena. The very idea of a problem fascinates me. In my opinion, problems are the only true connections between things and meanings. We can never fully understand things, and much less translate things into other things, such as meanings. One day I realized that since the beginning my works were not about answering about a question, but about raising one. So this is the exhibition, The Names, and it was very much done in the strength of removing the ability of this being precisable, which it's the names to affirm that things are nameless. And I want you to pay attention to these two images, because they will come back as many others, and I will show you. In that sense, in my work, I was never interested in images because they were, narratively or not, about something. Since the beginning, I would search for images that are something in itself. When I'm lucky, I find a hole, an interdiction, a blank, a problem. And the more I work, the less I can answer questions that are in my head since I began to do photography, such as, what is a photography and what is an image? Coming back to the sculpture of the impossible of Maria Martins, I was very interested in the symbology of this sculpture as this eating mouth that either gives or swallows things. And these, for me, were these figures that I was finding in museums of anatomy or fossils, these beings that they were these ultra teeth, vagina, very feminine forces of swallowing things, or of like this ultra form of lingma. It's an Indian sculpture which is kind of, it looks like a phallus, and it's the thing, the existing thing, the force to exist, the phenomena of something that exists. There was in the book many of those, it looks like a dick coming out of earth. This is a very common thing in caves. Cave is a very big vagina and with lots of dicks inside. It's super, I'm fascinated on caves. It's a very, very important practice of my artistic trajectory was being inside of them. So also was that mud, the mud of a cave where I was building this. This is a very brief resume of the very first years of my trajectory. Just so you see the images in the book, they were actually presented in this very simple and very large-scale images, always without glass. And in this sense of bodily relation to these images, that they were always bigger than the ability to comprehend them. That's why they needed to be big, so that we don't have the pretentiosity of being bigger than the thing itself, of feeling bigger. As in photography, we feel so much. We see this little scene and we go through it. Being so opaque and big, these images would always kick you out, and you would always be confronting it. So this is just a big resume. Study for Absence was in 2012. It was a very sharp exhibition that I did in the first São Paulo Biennial I participated, in this case as an artist. I would be coming back to this biennial to curate it 6 years after. I could never imagine that when I was doing this show. But it's a very encyclopedical or type of imagery being positioned. I won't go through much through it now. This is another example. All this, I forgot that so the impossible is kind of these two beings trying to communicate something to each other, and there was like this relation that would always be unreachable. So I was trying to build, yesterday with Jonathan, we were talking about the third image and how a thing within another thing creates an emptiness that creates really the thing. And I was always trying to reach that. I was always trying to reach infinity or zero within the equation of a certain group of things, regardless if it's two images, if it's a group of images. That's why I was so captivated by the film yesterday, because I think you guys were also trying to reach something through something else all the time, again and again and again, with a lot of tools, a lot of ways. It was so nice for me to see it. So this is an example of a very simple duo that it's about this third image that arrives within this. And then I did an entire exhibition dedicated to the impossible of Maria Martins, which is that sculpture that's already appeared a few times. So the impossible was the one exhibition that I did that was entirely done inside just one museum. It was the Museum of Paleontology and Compared Anatomy of Jardin des Plantes in Paris. It's a museum that is around 100 or more years old. And I was photographing the panels, which were showing what the things was in the table. And also in the staircases of the museum, there was this excavations. There was this graffiti that people would do. And this work itself, it's called the impossible, because as that image of the horse and the monster, it's as if it's two different ways of showing these animals, the tongue, the shape of the head, and then you have again the same kind of relationship with heads and tongue. You know they're not connected, but it's impossible not to create this sense of relation between those two images. And in the face of that, there was this other, I was getting back. This name of this work is The Impossible. This is the work. And this is The Analogy, which is also two panels of that museum that has this kind of form that connects. So this enter this shape with this, these ones, these holes with this. They are not at all the same thing, but giving this together creates this third layer. Pigment and gesture as expression of an incognito. This is just like a very, I've been drawing over my photographs now. And I'm doing a lot that with the GA series, which I'm not going to show here because there would be no time. I will stop before that. But it's just a very small example of that. So these were the original images, okay, that we've seen. And these are the images after I expressed them, because I wanted them to talk. I wanted them to express even more this impossibility of expressing things. They are called the undecifrables, or the unrevealable, and I made it to be even more. This is how the image was originally, and then it grew. This image has 3 meters by 2. So my problem is getting bigger. It's not solving. So I was within this context, okay, of this, and then I went for the first time, I went to prehistorical cave. to think I was arriving to the first museum, and I got collapsed. I really got collapsed. I had like a mental breakdown, because everything I was trying to learn, I realized that it was so much deeper, and that culture was actually a consequence of trying to relate things with meaning. I saw that very, very clearly in the walls of, at that moment, Lascaux. And it was really a collapse and a really big break in my trajectory. At the same time, I was reading The Death of the Author of Barthes, which also was a collapse for me, because I was trying to understand the object, and in this text, Barthes explained that the meaning of an object is not given by the artist, but by the absolute reader, which is humanity, which is comprehension, which is, in a certain moment, everything that can be understood out of that one object. So out of that, I understood that objects, they would shrink or expand their meanings to a different moment of time or of context. This concept would be the key of me looking at the little dancer of 14 years old of Degas, years after. We will get there. I just want to point that what I understood here was the thing that made me able to construct what I did with the Degas sculpture. And also in the same text, Barthes says about the tragedy that he says that the tragedy comes from the fact that the characters talk to each other with double meaning words, understanding precisely the wrong meaning of those words. And there's also a third character looking and watching this tragedy begins out of miscomprehension of the meaning of each word. So for that, I understood that language was by nature tragic. And I named this image the tragedy, actually. That's why it's here. And it's the background of a diorama in a museum of anthropology of Mexico. So my mind really blowed up. And I did a PDF to try to explain what I had understood. And that PDF became a first film, which I'm not showing here. We don't have the time. But it's a very conceptual, crazy, very crazy first film with 10 minutes. That it's a PDF that I go speaking over. Also can forward to you. And I had at that moment a solo show in Paris, which was going to be a solo show just like those. And coming back from the cave, I was living in Paris, I decided to change, and then I named the exhibition, I Don't Know, I'm the Author, I Can't Say, I Am Looking. And then there was this, I put these phrases around the exhibition, and I also started cropping my own photographs and making them merge into each other. So it was the first exhibition that I did that became very much a space of experimentation. So the object is always a particular action. The object is nothing. And again, these attempts, okay, this egg goes here, this egg is bigger than this eye. The things, the mimesis, they melt. And on the back of the gallery, you would see this very crazy film. The gallerist almost fired me out of the situation that I was obsessed with everything that I had understood. But it was really important. It was what would make me want to do this, which was my first curatorship. So, because when I understood that I could not take care of this problem that I was trying of relation between things and meanings, I decided that I needed help. And then I became this kind of curator, and I organized a very conceptual exhibition called No Sound. And No Sound, it's of defining that there would be no language in that exhibition, no attempt of translating things onto other things. It's my most experimental work. I won't go through it. I would need another hour to present, so I'm just reading here. Besides having photography as a main field of practice, Borges is also engaged in a mix of her engaged and mixed her practice with poetry, performance, dance, and also through richly experimental projects as curator. In No Sound, an exhibition in the form of a happening that lasted for 10 days and changed all the time, the questionings are proposed to be investigated through a large groups of visual artists, musicians, philosophers, writers, and dancers. Just so I say 4 very important things. In this show, I gave to the show 4 objects of proposition, which was the tools I wanted the artists to use, what I wanted them to investigate. The first object of proposition was a fire, for objects to get burned and then removed from fire, for us to observe the meaning of something after it gets burned. The second object of proposition was a hole in the ground, so that we could bury the objects, we could extinguish them, and remove them from being dead to observe what would happen with the meaning of that. The fourth was a phrase. Every object is an incognito or enigma. And the fourth was a velvet curtain which would define the space of representation. So everything that would go through the curtain would leave reality and enter the space of representation, even if it was a cat. So all these big changes, they defined a very, very new space in my work as an artist. The first show that I did after all those things was a group show in Amsterdam, where I decided to burn the image of a horse. I really burned it in the garden and showed the burned image. The name of the show was The Black Chalk and White Charcoal, or The Myth of the Absent Matter. So black chalk and white charcoal already this opposition. There's a documentary about this. It's super interesting. It's easy to find. The show was done inside a library. In honor to you, Delphine, I also put this. And inside the library of the museum, which has a very high ceiling, but you could go through here, the steps, the books were here, so all the books were hidden. There was this picture in the beginning. It's a very important picture for me because it's very, very symbolic, and but I won't. It's called The Absolute. I will explain it. It's worth it. I photographed this in the kids area of the Museum of Natural History of Bologna. It was a brain, the shape of a brain for kids to touch. So what actually existed was only this. But that shape of the brain in chalk was glued to a mirror. So what you see here is actually the reflex of that brain in this no space, which is the space of the mirror, and the reflex of the table here. So it's a very complex image, giving this floating brain in the middle of nothing. So when you get inside the curtains, you would see those 2 very big triptychs hanging. And also it was the first time I put sound on a show after the experience of doing no sound and working with musicians. So here is another example of montage in my work when I do triptychs. In this case, it was very much about mythology. So it was these wax models in a Turkish museum that I photographed, together with this painting, little part photographed in, I don't know, probably a museum in Italy. And it's about this descending action. The men were actually smoking opium, but it was about this blowing of existence or of the trade between heaven and earth. And here is the facing diptych, more about death and religion. The name of this triptych is Religare. And here is the horse, the burned horse, and the original one, they were shown together. And it's a photograph I took in a book of horse painting. Originally, it's of Géricault, and actually years after I would see this in London, this painting. So now I'm proving that entering the cave, it really messed me because I started doing these very experimental things. One of them was the collages. So take a look at this image very well, because it will appear in many works of mine. And this is the palm prints in Chauvet entering cave. So there are 4 images here. This is a brain, that it's from one photograph. This is a death mask with absence of the mask itself from another. And these are the palms of the Chauvet cave. And they are all placed in actually a painting, a physical painting of the brother of Duchamp. It's Jacques Villon, and I did this series in Paris in the house of a collector and philosopher and my friend. So here's the face of that image within another brain and within the same Jacques Villon painting. Here are other examples of those collages. This one is not a Courbet, but that guy had a Courbet and he didn't tell me, so I was actually placing papers and stones over a Courbet. This one is not, but it's from the same period. And that's White Fire is another, so you see it's 2 times the absolute. This is a landscape within that photograph over another painting. I don't know from who this one. So then I started to do this third image situation by sometimes showing the original with an image that was going to be within another image. And my exhibitions, they started to be more complex. This was one I did it in Greece. The curtains was also 7 meters high, and I covered the curtains with white pigment. That's why they feel like marble. And the main image of this show is it's the White Fire, this one. Then you see again the absolute, the white chalk, which is also a work that I will use to redo this work many, many times. And this is a found image of a boy holding a white thing in his head, the snow. And this is an image of a brain. It's called The Artifice. And also there was sound coming from the curtains. So my exhibitions became this space to build things. I did a performance with pigment. This is just a part of it. This was a friend that I also invited to do a performance. So since no sound, my exhibitions became a space of investigation, sometimes more alive, sometimes less alive. So when I did my first curatorship, I defined no sound, which would be, I would reject language. And at that moment, I decided that my next curatorship would be a tragedy. I would investigate language. And then it was 2018, and a bunch of things happened in my life. One, so the thought of doing the tragedy became 2 very big works. One was a performance that I did, Theater for Artifice. I won an award in Brazil, so I will read it here. It will be easier. As a result of winning the Brazilian Photography Award, Bolsa Zoom, held by Moreira Salles, Borges developed Theater for Artifice, a second and so far most vigorous role of her performances to become a photograph. Lasting as a happening of 8 hours, I engaged in a challenge of creating live collages, asking the invited artists to engage in a philosophical/mythological experience of becoming images. with the collaboration of 2 contemporary painters and 8 body artists that radically understood themselves as non-gender, practicing non-definable acts of body performances. For the happening, Borges printed 6 of her photographs as large-scale backgrounds, panels, and a myriad of cropped parts of her extensive photographs of ancients, masks, and other archetypical artifacts. Open for the public with a restricted number of entries, for hours she directed and interacted with the performative artists that were engaging in becoming images, as well as transmutating their bodies and the images with abundant use of pigment, ink, and body adornments. So basically, I printed scenarios, okay, and masks. I will just show here a little bit of what was it so you understand. So they were performing for the camera, not for the public, although the public was there. And there were hundreds of masks in the floor, and I was directing them here. So they were, and there were 5 different backgrounds. So the result would be this type of performance assemblage. Even the computer wants to stop. Like this. This is just a big series of that. And this. It was a very big series. I'm just going to pass them. I always show how I did it, otherwise people really don't understand that this was really something. People were really in those colors, and everything that it's in the image, it's really what was there being photographed. Just like in the assemblages of Degas, that they seem so photoshopic, but they were not. They were actually masks being placed over the little bronzes. And it was out of that performance that I had the idea of actually creating masks for little sculptures of Degas. So I'm not going to talk about the second tragedy, which is the biennial project, just to say this is a 2,400 square meters project. And this little thing here is the middle of it, which we'll see. It was entirely with velvet curtains. It had more than 30 rooms. It had a lot of performances. The plan was a labyrinth that started here in this cement, and then all here is kind of a mirror. So the images, the works here, they were related to the works here. It's too big project also. But just so you know, that little space that I was showing here, it's this, and it got transformed. We painted it. Also is a space in São Paulo Biennial where all the time, in every biennial, it's the most prestigious space for an artist because it's this very empty space, and in all other biennials, always a very phallic object would be placed in this middle. And I put a vagina. I put like an empty thing where things would happen. And then we painted the walls with ashes. This is the first entrance of the labyrinth. This is the Sara Lucas. It's a really, very interesting. And these are the works changing. This was a photograph of mine, and then this was the same work with a painter having painted on the photograph at Biennial. This was a performance happening in the middle, as well as other performances would constantly happen. So this is a Tunga. Tunga was very much there. This was third act of performances to become a photograph. This was all solo shows that I would skip in this presentation to arrive to Degas, to La Petite Danseuse de 14 ans, and the idea of the object as infinite. But I don't know if we have time. Can I extend because I showed the film? Okay. So I was asked just to photograph Degas' sculptures, La Petite Danseuse de 14 ans, just that, for the catalog, really. I didn't know, but they were planning on a retrospective on Degas for trying to, as she said so brilliantly, as a historical reparation on everything that is within that piece. I didn't know that, but when I was invited, I went and I created this myriad of ways of seeing that sculpture. And Adriano Pedrosa, he was so impacted by the fact that what they were trying to do theoretically, inviting 9 art historians, women around the globe to rewrite Degas, it happened in the images themselves. The images, they were so sometimes tortured, sometimes sad, sometimes very strong, sometimes looking like 100 years old, that Adriano Pedrosa actually changed it, and it became a duo show between those images of those objects and the objects themselves. So it was, instead of going in a museum and photographing so many interesting things, I photographed in a myriad of ways just this one thing. That's why I put this, the object is infinite. So that was just the show as it was presented. As you can see, it looks like a very old ballerina of 14 years old in the beginning. I also asked it to photograph the sculpture, the little bronzes, but my main goal, I was very happy to do a duo show with Degas, but my main goal was to redo my performances, which was the assemblages. And I didn't mention, and I won't, but this was, during biennial, I was investigating unconsciousness. One of the main things of the biennial was the Museum of the Unconsciousness of Nisi da Silveira. So I went through a lot of the idea of alchemy developed by Jung to talk about the unconscious. So I gained this power of thinking of the unconsciousness of something. And it was locked down. So in the assemblages, I was trying to dig the unconscious of the object. So I will show again, but I cropped the masks of ballerina. I made them become like these real masks. I put them on the bronzes. And that's how, and I put these backgrounds that I also photographed from Degas. And that's how I arrived to these images. But what I really wanted to find is, what if that image was dreaming? Or what would be the unconscious thoughts or existence of something? What is the dream of an object? And then, so it is a very surrealist images, very dreamlike images, but it's this reenacting of this sculpture. Because also, then at the time I did this, I would already know that that sculpture, remember the death of the author, where we learn that the object changes. So at the moment that sculpture was showed, it was considered an attack to society. It was considered an offense to show such a horrendous sculpture because it didn't have European traces. It looked like a black girl because it was showing the scum of society as dancers were compared or identified, regardless of being or not, to being prostitutes. And also it was showing a poor girl. So it was really considered offensive, and the guy removed the sculpture of the show he was presenting it, and never again in his life he presented any sculpture, much less the ballerina, but he kept the ballerina. And after he died, few years passed. I don't know if decades or not, but years passed. And the same sculpture, the same object, became the symbol of purity and of European culture and of femininity, coming from being horrendous to becoming the symbol of European culture with no change on the sculpture, but the meaning of the sculpture changed so dramatically. So also that's why Adriano Pedrosa was reviewing that sculpture so strongly by inviting people to rethink. And then when I learned out of that even more, I wanted to bring this unconsciousness from the sculpture itself. This is just a show that where this series is being presented right now. It was first in Nottingham Contemporary in the UK, and now it's being presented in Ireland in an exhibition about caves. And there's this very big, back screen of a cave and the images. That's it. Thank you so much.
So I think we have like 15 minutes. So if anyone has a question, comment, this is the time. So it's my time. I have a lot of questions actually going through my mind because while I was listening to you and paying attention, that there are so many images that you produce through your work with other images. But at a certain point, you were talking about something naked or raw. And since you are also always saying that there is an image and another image and another image, and that naked or rawness thing, I don't even know what word to put after that. This naked or raw thing, image, but that sometimes sounds like an image beneath the image, and you have also used the metaphor of excavating, but then it does not seem to be, and there is, I think there was a review of your book or something that was exactly phrasing it, saying, well, but it's not like finding the thing in itself, because it could give the impression that you're saying, like, I'm excavating and taking out images after images, and then I find something pure or raw or naked, but actually you're doing that, like producing more images. So my question, actually, saying all that, actually just to ask you, what is this raw or naked that you were talking about? What would be that?
I would relate that, when we have, I relate all that to the idea of monster. And in what way? What is monstrous? Monstrous is something that it's so horrible that we cannot bear to look at. So monstrosity is actually this thing of doing like that. It's an image that it's so strong. It's a horror that it's so horrifying that we cannot even bear to look at. And the opposite of that would be the idea of sacred, of something that is so shining that also it blinds us. There are paintings the Muslim, not Islamismo, the Islamic religion doesn't depict God because it's impossible to, okay? But there is, I was in Jerusalem for 3 months doing a residency last year, and I found these Iranian paintings where God was depicted so it was God on a horse, and instead of having a head, God was a very big flame. So there is this idea of hornness being this abominable thing we cannot look at, or this such a brilliant existing thing that it's so strong that it blinds us. Also in Greek mythology, there are many myths that when the god is revealed, the woman who is having sex with the god, thinking it was a snake, and then she sees the god, and actually she dies out of being in this wondrousness, which is being in front of something that it's so strong that it blinds you. So I would consider that what allows us, if there was only one object, that object would be God, and there would be no language. Because for having language, we have to compare one thing to the other. For knowing the taste of an apple, we have to have had the experience of the taste of a pear. We can only define things through difference. Language comes from difference. If there was only one object, if there was only one toothpaste in the earth, in the unlimited space, we would be that toothbrush, sorry. If there was only a toothbrush in the universe, we would be the toothbrush, and there would be no language, because I would only not know what is something, because that only something would exist. So after knowing what's bigger than small, what is, we can know the difference. So when we look at things, we look at what we know how to look at. Otherwise, we don't see anything. And that I learned it in the very beginning of my trajectory. When I was first photographing, I was very interested what images were. And I was actually living with a friend who got blind while I was living with him. But he had a disease, so he was getting blind slowly until the point that he actually became totally blind, and I was there. So I was facing blindness, being more and more blind. So I was interested in knowing what images were, and I had this person losing their ability to see, just with me so close. And at the time, I read a book that was very important to me, which is an anthropology in Mars, from Oliver Sacks. He's a neurologist. And at a certain moment in medicine, there was this discovery that a lot of people that were blind born, they became viewers. It was this surgery that they invented, so a special condition of blind people got fixed. So at one time in history, a lot of these people, they started to see. Blinds started to see. So this guy, this neurologist, did a test. He took the opportunity of testing, so what is to see with this group. And he discovered that seeing, that's where I get the comprehension that seeing is a linguistic experience. For example, there is this experiment where the people, they were already seeing it perfectly, and the doctor would put a ball, a square, and a triangle in their front. And they would touch and see, and they would say, this is a ball, this is a square, this is a triangle, because they know by touch how a ball is different from a square. And then the doctor say, okay, now close your eyes. And he would change the position of those three and saying, now without the hand, you tell me which one is the ball. And they couldn't. So to understand what is an image is a linguistic process of connecting image. As we understand words, connecting sounds with meanings, we also understand images connecting phenomena of seeing with meaning. So that's how I got to this will of photographing things where the meaning was kind of removed, so you would see a brighter or a more horrendous aspect of things, which is things that we don't understand. This is the abominable or a marvelous situation that culture comes from. Culture keeps inventing meaning to make everything be easy, and we can just have a life and just say, oh, instead of like, what is this? It's like, this is a glass. This is just a glass. But if ultimately we look at an object, philosophy is trying to solve this problem. They were not possible so far, but they were not succeeding. But the philosophy is saying, what is this? But what is this? But how? But what is this? And then you came, oh no, but this is a glass. I know what it is. I don't care. So it's this. That's why my work is fundamentally philosophical, responding to you from yesterday. Okay.
Thank you.
I just have a technical question, but maybe as an artist, the techniques and the choices of materiality are very important to understand the work itself. When you photograph, what kind of camera and do you use digital or analogic or both?
No, I never use it on an analogic camera. In the beginning I couldn't care less for technique, but then when I understand the relation of technique and image and form, I became a geek. And I actually, in a few years, I started teaching about digital photography, because to really do something that you need to know how to do, then technique is so liberating. So I was a very key, like really studying photography and very like technical aspects of the digital camera, to be able to do, also to photograph so big and to print so big.
It's interesting because I thought like in a work that works with the idea of the materiality of imagination and everything and so forth, it was very important to use analogic and to work with analogic photography and the materiality and the chemicals of it. But it's just a curiosity for me. Conceptually, for me, it's important to understand. But this was my question.
For me, it makes no difference, because it's
really?
not...
For me, it makes
not
a
at
lot
all.
of difference.
Because it's this thing, this materiality, it's not within the camera, but it's within the problem of what images are and what's the relation with that, with the object. So it's not like a romantic idea that the analog camera would be more faithful to reality, because there's no, faith in reality at all in my work.
I don't see it in that perspective. Maybe we can talk after.
Yeah.
But that's it, maybe.
And Sofia, just to come back to this, to what you mentioned about this cornucopia of images, so images of images and images, you mentioned an experience of your childhood of detachment, no?
Yeah.
About you and the...
Detachment,
yeah. Between you and your sister, you and reality around. Could you please come back to that point?
Yes.
Because obviously we can think about in this process in terms of neurotical, in a good sense.
No, I think it's not even neurotical. When I was doing the research for biennial, I went to the Museum of the Unconsciousness, and then I started really working with the schizophrenics. Mm-hmm. And I actually was identifying some aspects of this experience with their experience. Actually, there was one artist that was in biennial, he was a schizophrenic, and he was saying, Sofia, I know you escaped. you should be here with us. He was very intuitive. It was in the very beginning he felt that, and he was right, because this perception that I would have as a child, only then I would realize that it was a very strong and disruptive relation to reality, which is very common in schizophrenia. And also I would after find, like in Buddhism, explanation for that, or religious explanations for seeing things, detaching from meaning, or this ultra meaning of things. But it was really, really an experience that I would have until around my 20s. But it was, and I could never know when I would have it again, but I was really waking up in this state, and I couldn't even identify myself with my own name. I would know my name was Sofia, but I couldn't, I had nothing to do with that. And I would know that that girl by my side was my sister sleeping in the other bed, but I also would find that absurdly strange and foreign from my body. So really, I think I'm an artist out of a reaction to those experiences that were following me until my 20s. It's not like I had this one time when I was 8 years old. Welcome.
So Sofia is a good name.
Yes.
But
yes,
Borges too.
Yes.
True. Yes, that's true. And yesterday, when there was a talk, I don't know if he's here, on this naturalist Marcius, from Marcius. Oh yes. And the dialogue between Marcius and Goethe, and the idea of the forest, the Amazon, as sort of tragedy of civilization, right? What was the...
The contemplation of Amazon meant in the end the tragedy of modernity, because
you mentioned the word civilization, I think. Tragedy of civilization. Oh, but it can be tragedy of modernity. It doesn't matter. You can equate modernity and civilization. And I think it's interesting because while you were saying that you were in the zoo, in the museum, and the aquarium, and I was with the image of the Hilke poem on the panther, where he looks the panther in the zoo and says that the wilderness was extracted from the eye of the panther. The panther was widerless in the zoo. And when you go to the zoo, when you go to the museum, in a way, you're trying to
get it back,
in a way, to bring the tragic.
Yes, the tragedy of those.
The tragedy of this civilization.
Yeah. You've touched a very sensitive point, because I have an unexplainable story with that panther. Really, I had I don't know if I tell here, it's very, so I would tell it, because no one never said about that poem. But the thing is, when I was, at that same year that I did the presentation here, the 2013 Museu Berardo, I got 4 experiences of almost dying, and one of them was they were very traumatic. The most traumatic one was people entering my house to rob me and thinking there was hidden money on the house, so they started torturing me to tell them where the money was, and there was no money, so it became a nightmare, because these people were convinced there was money, but there was none. So they did 3 Russian roulettes in my head at that day. I got ultra traumatized. So I already had this monstrousness and this relation to thinking about death. But after this episode, and these 3 others would not be so strong, but very strong, but I would jump. So just after that assault, 1 week after I was back in Paris, this was in Brazil, 1 week after I was back in Paris, and I was devastated. I was completely lost. I was in post-traumatic disorder. I didn't know, but I was very, very deeply, and it was my birthday. And I was dressed in black. I had no phone, no computer. They had robbed me absolutely everything 1 week before. And I walked in the streets of Paris. And I went to Jardin des Plantes, and I seated there. I wanted to go to the museum, but I didn't. I just walked to the Jardin des Plantes. When I was back, I received an email of a guy who was in love with me in Brazil, saying, Sofia, I know today was your birthday, so I just went to a bookshop, and I got one book, and I opened one page. And that's the page where I opened, and it was the panther. And I was dressed in black, and it was about this very sad, imprisoned panther on the Museum of Jardin des Plantes, Paris, where I was. That's not enough of this story. So almost 1 month, and then already I was so impacted by this synchronicity. 1 month after, more or less, I traveled to make the exhibition, the names here. I came to Portugal, I went to Madrid to do another show. I went to New York to buy some equipment back of photography. And then 1 month after, I was in Paris again. And I had an upcoming exhibition in Brazil, which was going to be the impossible. But I had all my computer stolen. I had everything stolen, so my head my head was zero, you know. I had nothing from the past. I couldn't start again. So I thought, oh, I'm going to that museum of paleontology and comparative anatomy. I've been there. I did the names. I don't know why I'm connecting so much with you, Delphine, the names, but I am, because I met Delphine at that moment. I did the names in Lisbon, and then I needed to do this solo show in Brazil. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to go again to that museum, because I know there are more things there that I can remove from and do a show. That's why The Impossible is the only exhibition it's with only one museum being investigated. So I was there with my equipment to go to that museum, and it was the one day that museum was closed. It was 1st of May. So the museum was closed. I was with my equipment, and I was like, oh my God, I so much needed to do this, and the museum is closed. And then I thought, what is open here? And then I realized the zoo was open. And I've been photographing zoos. I was not so interested in photographing zoos anymore. But at that moment, for that exhibition, I would photograph a lot of zoos after. But I was with my equipment, so I entered the zoo. I didn't even remember the panther, the story that would happen 1 month before. And then I did some pictures, and then there was this big door, and I was like, I'm going to enter. What is this big area? And then all the case, it was like an egg. It was like a round shape. All the animals on the cages aside, they were out playing in the garden. They were not in the vitrines. And there was this bunch of kids screaming to this one animal who is in the very most important of those vitrines. And then I was with my camera, so I walked towards that one. And it was the Black Panther. And I swear, I can prove, because I was with my camera, so I photographed for 11 minutes. What happened is, as I was close to those kids, the panther stopped, because the panther was crazy, doing that, ta, 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 like animals do in museums. As I was near the panther stopped doing like that. It jumped 1-2 stages, and she lay it down. I swear, I can find the images here now. It's just that the story I never told to. I don't only tell my friends this, but I was very devastated. So I had that black heart. And the panther, so she jumped from 1, 2, she laid down a platform, she put her head in her hands, and she stared at me for 11 minutes without stopping. For 11 minutes. The Black Panther of Jardin des Plantes, Paris, 100 years after that poem was written, stared at me. And I know it's 11 minutes because I started photographing her, and she was staring at me regardless. And in digital photography, you have the place and the time. So after I would see that it took her 11 minutes. When does a wild animal look at something for 11 minutes? For her to stop being in this deep contact just with me. She was licking herself, looking at me. She was doing that, you know, when you were sleepy. Yeah, she was doing, and she was deeply, absurdly sad, and that is easy to see in the images I photographed her. And then after these 11 minutes, she just then behaved normally like a panther in a zoo and went back to being like just distracted. But for 11 minutes, she was looking at my eyes, and I photographed this. I never showed these images. But thank you for asking and seeing that in my entire presentation.
That's it.
I wonder about the guy that was in love with you.
The guy who was in love with me?
Who said it, the poem?
I will be honest, that guy wanted to marry me. No, it's true. And out of that... No. And out of that, when I returned to Brazil and I did the impossible, he gave me this ring. And it's inside it, it's written the impossible. He wanted to marry me. I never married him, but I still carry the ring. And it's written the impossible here inside it. But yeah, it's a friend.
Thank you, Sofia.
Thank you, everybody.